In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Taylor, fancy seeing you again.
Hello. Hello.
So you just you just don't change for 4 days? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean that's not out of the question. I do have piles and piles of laundry to deal with later, so who knows?
What does you and Juan's usual? Okay, so hold on. I'm gonna reiterate a point that I talked about on the last episode, having to do with me flying from DC back to Dallas.
Mhm.
And that was as angry as I was, or not angry. I was just like frustrated because I wasn't getting my way because I'm a child. There was all these couples around my age with like kids.
Yeah.
And I thought about you and Juan and was like, dude, I bet they would be so composed in this situation. But I did see one couple who were being so mean to this old lady who was their Uber driver that came to pick them up with their kids. Like the woman was like screaming at the old lady because like she didn't know how to unlock her own doors because maybe it was like a new car and she's old, whatever, you know?
Whatever,
And
yeah.
and she was so mean to her. She ran over to her and like opened the door and was like, "This is it," and like pushed the button for her and slammed the door at her. And I was like, "I get that you're upset, man, and I get that it's got to be worse with the kids, but like we don't have to devolve, like that way." So, anyways,
I definitely was mad at the in at Newark Airport. I was upset with the people in the security line because there were like 14 people working there and none of them were doing one thing. And there was a shoe stuck in the conveyor belt, so no one's luggage was going through. And I was like, "Excuse me, sir, there's a shoe." And he was like, and just like walked away. So then I got someone else and I was like, "Excuse me, there's a shoe." And the other guy goes, You already told me." And I was like, "I told you 5 minutes ago, you didn't do anything." And then one was just like, "Oh my God, stop yelling at the people here." But I've never seen people more worthless than the people that I've seen working at the security in Newark Airport.
that's like my experience earlier when I stopped at Chipotle. There was one guy and he didn't know how to roll a burrito. He broke two burritos and they kept getting new tortillas and trying to roll them. There's like 8 people behind him. Like, just turn and ask for help, or one of y'all pay attention to this guy and help
Yeah.
your colleague.
Oh my God. So yeah, I was potentially irrationally mad then, and then Juan's just like, "Okay, like, don't be mad," because then all of our luggage had to get like looked at. Anyway, so usually when we're waiting, Juan will sit down with the kids and I'll walk around because I need to like get out my nervous energy, you know?
That's the thing. Y'all have a good partnership vibe where
Yeah.
like when one of you loses it, the other one usually doesn't, and so
Yeah,
it balances
we're
each
really
other
lucky
out.
that way. We really do.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah.
Ugh, jealous. Okay. So, oh yeah, welcome to Doom to Fail. I'm Farz this time. This is Taylor.
So
There you go. And this week, Taylor did a true crime / history one, and I'm going to do a true crime only story. And I'm going to focus today's story on the entertainment / sports industry.
ooh.
I'm going to be covering professional wrestling. And
Ooh.
I'm going to be covering a particular wrestler who met a very tragic fate. Can you guess who I'm talking about?
This is the one who killed his family?
No. That's
Is
why I
it
said that, because I knew you think, I know that you think I'm predictable, and I would have done Chris Benoit. So I was like, ask her, because she'll say Chris Benoit, and I'll say
is it
no.
Macho Man Randy Savage?
No, but did he die a tragic death? I thought he died of
I think oh God, he died after doing something that like hurt him and then he got sick in the hospital. No, just keep going. I'm just gonna name wrestlers until you tell me. So you just tell me.
Macho Man Randy Savage. Dude, yeah, he had a heart attack.
That sounds right.
I know what you're talking about, because everybody thought that he was on drugs or something because he was driving and then he just drove his car into a telephone pole and they thought he was high or drunk or something, but it wasn't. He literally had a heart attack while he was driving and then drove into a tree. Also, Macho Man Randy Savage is like one of my idols. So yeah, sad story.
Nice.
Anyways, the guy that I'm talking about, his actual real name is Frank Donald Goodish, but his stage name was Bruiser Brody. So I'm going to do a little bit of a history and a background of wrestling, or professional wrestling as a concept. Obviously, professional wrestling and actual wrestling are very different. Actual wrestling is a real sport. Professional wrestling has super athletes doing entertainment, basically.
Mm-hmm.
We came up in the 1980 90s. We came up in the Vince McMahon Jr. era of
Hmm.
wrestling, which was back then called the World Wrestling Federation. The World Wildlife Fund was really upset about that, sued the shit out of them until they changed their name to the WWE. That's when wrestling stopped being this like regional, local thing that all different parts of the country were involved in and became kind of like a unified organization under what is now called the WWE. There's all kinds. There's now it's becoming a little more fractured. There's AEW. There's a whole host of other ones that are popping around the country, but WWE is still like the number one.
Did you watch
And
the documentary about the WWE?
no,
On So there's a documentary about it, and it's like 2.5 hours long. And the first 2 hours, you're like, this is so interesting. What is going on? Like you learn all this history, all this stuff. And the last 30 minutes, you're like, oh, this has been a commercial for the WWE. Because then it's like them talking to you, being like, you should watch it. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
I just watched a commercial for this.
yeah,
It was great though.
basically. But like, so Vince McMahon, he kind of he made the transition from it being a sport really to being entertainment. That's actually how they get around all the steroid regulation. The fact that they don't have to do any sort of testing is because it
Mm,
can't be considered a sport. It's considered entertainment. That's why these guys look the way they do. Like nobody looks like that naturally.
right.
And part of that was with wrestling is developing characters. You develop storylines. You have villains who are then built up to be torn down by heroes and all that good stuff. Before Vince McMahon came around and kind of unified it into this like storybook model of entertainment, there was all kinds of loose federations of regional organizing wrestling entities around the country. You might have seen pictures going around of Zac Efron looking like a weirdo with like square jaw and like a bowl cut.
I just saw this. It's Zac Efron and the guy from The Bear.
Yes.
Yes.
You know what that is?
It's a movie. Is it about this?
So it is a movie about one of the most prominent families in professional wrestling before the era of WWF and WWE, called the Von
Huh.
Erlich family. Fritz von Erlich founded this entity called the WCW, which was the World Championship. I'm not reading my notes. I'm going off memory, and I'm totally going to buy. You know what? Scratch what the Federation was. It was based out of Texas, but it was the beginning of one of the most popular franchises organizations of professional wrestling. The two guys, the guy from The Bear and Zac Efron, those were two of his kids, Eric and
Got it.
Kevin. I think their name
Cool.
is. Yeah, and they're still famous. They're still incredibly famous wrestling family. Like they're royalty. They're one of that caliber. But back then, this kind of wrestling wasn't really sanctioned by any legal entities, and so a lot of what was going on was people actually getting hurt. People were really getting hit by ladders. People were
Hmm.
really getting hit by chairs. Their fists. They were getting. People were using staples on their own heads, like just like stapling stuff onto like the head of themselves, their opponent, using razor blades to cut
There's tape.
themselves.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah, it was actually real legit, and it was an incredibly bloody affair. And the bloodier it was, the better it was for the promoters because they were competing in the regionals of like trying to get
Right.
this, people to show up to their shows, and they wanted to make sure that if it was gory enough, that people would come to their show. So at this time, wrestlers were considered independent contractors, and they sort of still
Hmm.
are. They would bounce between promoters and had to kind of make a name for themselves to draw in a crowd and earn a higher percentage of the ticket sales. So on the one hand, you have these like gigantic super athletes who can do and would subject themselves to extreme violence. And
Hmm.
also they were running like a one-man business. They were trying to promote themselves and
Hmm.
build an entity for themselves and a path to becoming kind of the next big thing. So I bring this up because if you look at pictures of Bruiser Brody or watch any of his matches,
Wait, can I look him up?
yeah, yeah. Actually, I'll pause on this. This will be the silent portion of our podcast while Taylor looks up Bruiser Brody.
He looks awesome and crazy. He has crazy eyes and he has curly hair and he's doing this for some reason. Why is he doing this?
He's so cool. He's so
What is this?
cool. She's
He
holding
looks
her hand
awesome.
out. Like he have you seen the one with him? He swings like an actual chain around his head like that. He's a crazy man. Like he looks
Oh,
like
I see him with the chain. He's huge. I mean, they're all
huge,
huge, but holy crap.
huge. So the reason I wanted you to look him up is because how he looks in his appearance. You see how his forehead has rivets in it.
Yeah. What's that?
That's because of all the scarification. That's from like cutting his own face with razor blades and stuff like that. Because if someone hits you, you want to like make it look real, so you just like go and then you have a razor blade and just like swipe down real hard and just cut your face
There's
open.
ketchup. Oh my God.
No, they want to be authentic.
Whoa.
And all this plays into what I'm going to talk about later on, which is the tragic part of this whole story. Because when you look at this guy, you're like, he is crazy looking. Like he came off. His persona was a backwoods insane person who would do anything.
I see that. Wait, why is he holding his hand like this? Holding his hand out
Oh,
like,
let me see. Let me see which
what
picture
does
that
that mean?
is.
Everyone who's looking at me, he's like in a bunch of the pictures, he's like holding his hand out like he's, I don't know, is that
Oh, I
like a
don't know.
gesture?
I don't know
Anyway, he's going.
what that is. Yeah, I never noticed that was happening on several other things. So, okay, going back to Bruiser, he was a physical specimen, even amongst other physical specimen who were
Yeah.
wrestlers. He weighed 300 pounds and was 6'8". He was
Whoa.
huge, huge.
Imagine
I
that
looked
guy in
this
an
up.
airplane.
Yeah, he had to lie down
Yeah.
on like the center aisle. I looked this up, Taylor. Guess what the average height of an American man is?
5'10", 5'9".
No. Right now, the average height of an American man is 5'8". 5'8".
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Guess what the weight is?
130.
197.
Oh,
So kind of heavy, kind of on the portly side, and
sure.
pretty short. Um, Generally speaking, a wrestler these days is between 6'2" and 6'5" in height and 230 and 260. That's the average
Right.
spectrum. This guy 50 years ago was 300 pounds and 6'8". So like you look at him and you look at his size and you look at his height and you can see the kind of imposing figure that he actually was. And you
I have a,
really go ahead, sorry.
my friend Taylor is 6'8", and it's delightful when we're together because he's 6'8" and I'm 5'2", and we're both named Taylor, and it's hilarious. But he's very, very skinny. But
Okay.
but he's so tall that like when he like reaches up for something, like we were like at a party and there was like a booth that had like a short like a ceiling on it that I couldn't even reach, and he put his beer on top of the ceiling. Like he can reach things that you're like you can touch the ceiling. It's
Like
crazy.
superheroes. Like
Yeah.
superheroes. It's crazy.
So 6'8" is like just crazy tall.
So the reason I bring all this up is because back then you had to maintain your reputation pretty carefully because that's the way you would earn money.
Hmm.
So by all accounts, despite Bruiser being a terrifying looking and very difficult person to deal with professionally, he was actually like a smart, articulate, and very devoted person to his wife,
Hmm.
Barbara Smith, and the one child they had together. And by all accounts, everything he ended up doing professionally that made him kind of not loved, he did it because he wanted to provide them the kind of life that he wanted them to have.
Hmm.
So, on the topic of being difficult, Bruiser was known to guard his character and look out for his family's interests pretty fiercely. Again,
Hmm.
his character was basically the ultimate alpha male, so when promoters would bring him in to lose against their top wrestler, he'd often disagree and refuse to do so. Or
Hmm.
in some cases, if he did lose, he'd make it obvious. Like he would just come out into the middle of the ring and just lay down on his back like the match was over. And just do
It's
it like totally impromptu.
it's so interesting because like I definitely grew up watching wrestling and being like, this is super fun. I remember at one point I like knew that it wasn't real, but I didn't care, obviously, because like you know it's not real, but you don't care. But I also like love the stories. But there is like, but it's I know it's not real, but also like, did you watch the Andre the Giant documentary?
Yeah, yeah,
Delightful. But like the big Andre the Giant Hulk Hogan, they didn't know what was gonna happen.
yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
crazy to me. That like they didn't know what was gonna happen, and Andre the Giant just had to like decide what was gonna happen in the ring, and they'd like played off each other. So they were like not, actually like hurting each other in a terrible way. They got hurt, obviously, but like I can't believe no one knew what was gonna happen. It was on pay-per-view.
Yeah, well, I think Andre got super hurt during that because
Yeah.
Hogan slammed him and he was like 550 pounds and like just
His back
totally
hurt like
shattered his back.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I think yeah,
yeah.
I think that was just crazy to me. I was like, that wasn't like planned minute by minute. They didn't practice. They just like waited till they got out there and then like did their dance.
So this would happen in back in this day too, where a lot of times the promoters would say you have to lose, but then like the way you lose or what ends up happening, you kind of like make those calls and those decisions in the moment in the ring with your opponent. So it
Uh-huh.
is kind of you're trying to like lose with dignity, but in this case, Bruiser would sometimes just say, you know what? nobody would ever believe I'd lose to this idiot, so I'm just gonna lay down on the ground and just lose by just being on my back because he was trying to guard his reputation as like the tough guy essentially. There was one story where he literally stopped wrestling and just stood in the ring looking around. And this was presumably done to piss off the promoter because he disagreed that he should lose the other opponent, to the wrestler in the match with him.
Right.
This
You're
is a
not gonna,
common
like,
thing.
get in a fight with him.
Exactly. Yes, that is exactly where this is headed.
Yeah.
So other wrestlers and most promoters didn't really like Bruiser very much since they're all kind of jockeying for status and position in the industry. If Brody, I said Brody, I wrote Brody, but I mean Bruiser. If Bruiser decided he wasn't going to lose a bout, about that he was paid to lose, it lowered the stock of his opponent. So the opponent was on the crescendo of his career. He's supposed to win this giant bout against Bruiser, and then Bruiser doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and then his stock drops basically. So in 1986, Bruiser was on tour with a promotion called World Wrestling Council, WWC for short, and that is a Puerto Rican-based promotion. And one of their top stars was a wrestler, this guy named José Gonzáles, who wrestled under the name Invader Number One. It was like a tag team. So there was Invader 1, Invader 2, Invader 3. He was Invader 1, basically. He was in there alone. Jose had bouts with Bruiser and would regularly get the shit kicked out of him. And the matches not go the way they were planned to go because, again, Brody, I keep saying Brody, I'm just going to call him Bruiser. Bruiser was being difficult. Just after one match where Jose was being transported to the hospital, he was overheard by two other wrestlers, one of whom will become relevant later, Tony Atlas, as saying, I'm going to kill that man one day, referring to Bruiser. Like, he fucked him up. Like, he didn't go down the way he was supposed to go down. And he also totally fucked him up. And also, if you look at the two of them side by side, it's obvious. Like, you can watch those matches. They're, like, everywhere on YouTube. It's like me fighting a child. Like, it looks alien.
Right.
So
wait, I'm sorry. I have to stop again. I was thinking someone was playing chess this weekend. And I was thinking at the time that you were playing chess against a child and you yelled at the child because the child was like, "Why don't you practice?" And you were like, "I have a job."
I actually thought about that recently because he was so good. He would like play me and then go play four other people at the same time. Like he was just like looking at me like, okay, and just move on.
You were like, "Fuck you, 8-year-olds. I'm a grown up. I have a car. Fuck you."
I know. That kid probably has a nicer car now. So in 1988, Bruiser wanted to invest in his own promotion and found the fervor and passion of fans in Puerto Rico quite appealing. He decided to become part owner of the World Wrestling Council. This didn't sit too well with Jose, who was a key figure in the promotion as their top billed star, and someone who also viewed Brody as the reason why his value as a top wrestler had been diminished over the past bouts that they've had. Again, this is the guy that said, I'm going to kill that guy one day. On July 16th, Bruiser was supposed to wrestle at the local stadium in San Juan for WCW. He was in the locker room with fellow wrestlers Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantel, who had traveled to the venue together. The following is from Tony Atlas and Dutch's account of that night. They noticed that Jose was in the locker room when they first walked in. They noticed that he was sitting in a chair with the two existing owners of World Wrestling Council, Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica. Dutch and Jose left the dressing room, not together, they just went their separate ways. So from here on out, we're basically going to rely entirely on Tony Atlas's account. The one thing to note about this is that this all sounds kind of like embellished. A lot of it sounds embellishy. It's worth noting that for the past 40 years, this story's never changed. Tony Atlas has never changed the story. It's been written down, it's been documented, he's been recorded saying it. I watched recordings of him talking about this. It's never changed. So I'm leaning in favor of believing what he says. So Tony says that Bruiser approaches him and asks him to do a drawing of his son because apparently Tony was a pretty good amateur artist. Tony says that Jose approached him and Bruiser with a towel wrapped around his arm and asked Bruiser to have a private conversation in the shower, presumably about the match that's coming up that night. They walk into the shower and Carlos and Victor surround Tony, which insinuates that they knew what was about to happen. The way Tony tells it, he hears a scream from the locker room and rushes into the shower and sees Bruiser hunched over and bleeding. He says that his intestines fell onto his arm, like that he was stabbed really, really badly. And Tony laid on him basically trying to protect him. One of the things that he said was that Bruiser told him, like, don't let them hurt me anymore, is what he
Oh.
said. Apparently, he was still holding the picture of his son. It was a picture that he wanted Tony to draw for him as he was kind of bleeding out. From what his account of this was, is that Bruiser wouldn't have seen what was going to happen. Jose had a knife that was covered, and he's walking in front of Bruiser into the locker room, and then just turns around quickly, just sticks it in him.
Oh my
Because
God.
to Tony's point, like again, if you look at the two, you're like, there's no way this guy would ever get the drop on him because he's just so much smaller, and that's the way that he would have been able to do it. Bruiser is laying there with Tony on top of him for about 45 minutes. This was the night of a show, and wrestlers were kind of coming and going out of the locker room, and also there was traffic jams slowing down the progress of ambulances trying to get to Bruiser because everybody was trying to get to the stadium to watch the wrestling match. But at this time,
Right.
Bruiser is still alive. It's 45 minutes in. So I'm getting into like conjecture territory here. I wrote down that the following to me smacks of cultural differences here between American versus Puerto Rican dynamics and also community differences around wrestlers. When paramedics arrived, they couldn't lift Bruiser, so they asked the other wrestlers to help lift him onto the gurney, and nobody would help. The idea being that they were in Puerto Rico wrestling for a Puerto Rican promotion. This was an American that was dead on the ground, and the idea being that this probably has some ties to the business of the organization, and they don't want to get involved.
Wait, was he dead?
Still alive.
Still alive. So other wrestlers wouldn't help, but Tony was helping.
Tony was the only one helping. And Tony's the one that lifted him up. Tony was the
Yeah.
only one that could lift him up.
Oh my God.
Eventually, when he gets to the hospital, the doctors were very slow to get to him. According to Tony, what he was told after asking for medical attention for Bruiser was that we'll get to him when we get to him, basically insinuating that a stab wound in Puerto Rico is like catching the cold in the U.S. So not a priority to do anything to help him.
I mean, Puerto Rico is not doing well. My whole side of the family on Juan's side is from Puerto Rico, and Juan's dad is a doctor in the U.S. Puerto Rico is in the U.S., but his dad's a doctor. He traveled around, but he was in Puerto Rico and he got into an accident on his bike because he rides his bike all the time, and he broke his hip, and they were so upset that he was in Puerto Rico, and they like botched it. Like his legs are different heights. Like, he was not as good as being in America, and he is like could have spent the most money. You know what I mean? Like he got the best medical care, but it wasn't as the equivalent to being like stateside because Puerto Rico just has such shitty resources.
Well, so I was like, I thought part of this smacked of like prejudice, and so I started looking into some like numbers and looking at like what would be a good indicator of this. I looked at murder rates. So this happened in 1988. I found murder rates only from 1990 onward. In 1990 is actually when Puerto Rico started doubling down on violent crime. So probably not 100% accurate. But even in 1990, the murder rate per 100,000 people was 18 people. By comparison, in the U.S., per 100,000 people at the same time, it was 9. So it was double the murder rate of the U.S., which, seems like a lot. Also, one thing that I found was that the highest per capita murder rate today in the world is Jamaica with 45.
Whoa.
That's crazy. And I also wrote this down. For anybody that thinks that we're more violent now than we ever have been, in 2022, the murder rate in the U.S. was 6.
Oh, wow. Good for us.
Yeah, so it went down by a third.
Good job. Also, on my trip to Hyde Park, I saw pictures of Eleanor and Hick when they toured Puerto Rico in the 30s. To see the condition of people there and to vow to help them.
Nice. Puerto Rico is beautiful. I was there last year. It's incredible. I'm sure you go regularly, don't you?
I've been a couple times. No, I've been twice. Once for work, for fun. Like my work used to, remember when I worked at the hedge fund, they would take us to the Bahamas and Puerto Rico every year.
Ah, there you go.
Just for fun. But then also I think I went once with the family. We'll go again. We have uncles, the kid's great grandma lives there.
Nice. So anyways, doctors eventually see Bruiser and they tell Tony that he can leave. So he ends up leaving. He goes back to the stadium, into the locker room. He does his match. And by this point, the police are interviewing everyone. And Tony says he's surprised to learn that the police tell him that based on the interviews of the other wrestlers that are in the locker room, all they would say is that some crazed fan broke into the locker room and stabbed Bruiser. And this kind of reminded me of the whole code of silence with police. What is it? The secret, I forgot. The blue shield, thin blue line. Yeah. except for wrestlers. Tony was the only person who said to the police that night that Jose is the one that stabbed him.
Oh my God, can we buy Tony something? He's still alive.
He is so
I feel like
alive.
we should have sent him a flowers or something.
Yeah, well, part of it was that again, nobody wanted to lose their job. Nobody wanted to
I
lose
know.
access to the promoter.
But
And
man,
Tony
he
was
like
there on top of him.
fuck. He really helped his friend. He wrote a book called Atlas, too much, too soon.
Aw.
I like this guy.
Yeah, he
Tony.
seems like a good dude, especially when you listen to
Yeah.
him doing interviews on this topic. So ultimately, Jose is arrested and put on trial for Bruiser's murder. And this is where the code of silence thing really picks up. Prosecutors didn't really bring in any witnesses to testify on behalf of Bruiser or on behalf of the state. What happened in the locker room? Apparently, they did ask for the testimony of Dutch and of Tony,
Mhm.
but they received those summons after the trial already concluded. Like it was like
What?
one of those situations, so they didn't have a chance to do it. At the end, Jose claimed self-defense, and realistically, given the fact that Jose was kind of like a local celebrity in San Juan, and Bruiser was a terrifying-looking human being that scared the fans,
Mhm.
they were like, yeah, self-defense makes sense. It's like it
Shit.
was like a prejudicial thing, in my opinion. They're trying to protect the hometown kid.
Yeah, and I mean, his reputation like preceded him because that was his job, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but like,
Boo.
it's worth noting that Bruiser would go into the crowd swinging this chain. So like,
Right.
people would run away from him. But like, that's how he made money. He was like,
That's the whole point. It's
that's
super
the whole
fun.
point.
Like, yeah. It's hard. It's so funny when you like hear like their real personalities and these real stories. You're like, God, I was so fucking scared of the Undertaker, you know? He's like, fine. But he's not
Uh,
actually like a terrifying Undertaker who's like looking at you under his like greasy hair, like trying to embalm you, you know, but you're like, ah,
Mine was Stone Cold. I thought Stone Cold was such a
nice,
badass. Remember
nice.
Kane? Kane was Undertaker's brother. They're fun.
Mm.
Thank God these guys are still alive. They all die so young because of the steroid use, but these guys are still with us.
Brothers of Destruction.
I wrote down that Jose's build, height, and weight was 5'10" and 230 pounds. So it was like, again, looking at the two of them side by side, it's like, okay, you can see
Hmm.
why a jury would think that this was a self defense case. But again, according to Tony, he would have just turned around and stabbed him. There was no conversation being had.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, Jose's fully acquitted. He goes on to live his life. He's actually still alive. He's still kicking around San Juan. He
Whoa.
wasn't a social pariah whatsoever, and he actually he spent years wrestling after that. He actually came out of retirement briefly. I think it was in 2011, 2010, when he was like 60 years old and wrestled again. So,
What?
yeah. So those are the details of that night. Here's Tony's speculation on what he thinks happened
Hmm.
overall. According to Tony, Bruiser had been very vocal that this organization, this Puerto Rican World WWC, owed him about $40,000 in pay for this tour, and it was well known that Brody was definitely not shy about beating the shit out of people that he felt wronged him,
Hmm.
and he could. And he'd been telling people that this was what he was going to do if he didn't collect on his $40,000, beat the shit out of the owners of the WWC if he didn't collect.
Hmm.
That night in July of 1988 was one of the last nights before the tour would have ended, which means that like he would have needed to get paid or somebody would have had to have gotten the shit kicked out of him.
Hmm.
The reason why Tony, Dutch, and Bruiser left the hotel to go to the stadium together that night is because Bruiser had gotten stood up by Jose. So it was well known that the two didn't like each other, but they were professional enough, they'd wrestle enough to where like Jose was like, yeah, Bruiser, I'll take you to the stadium that night. And he never showed. He was in the locker room waiting for him when they got to the locker room. Bruiser just
Hmm.
went up to Tony and Dutch and was like, I got stood up by Jose. Can I ride with you guys? Like, sure, go ahead, let's do it. The speculation that Tony put forth is that something was supposed to happen to Bruiser at the hotel before Jose was supposed to pick him up.
Hmm.
Like a hit. Like there was supposed to be a hit on Bruiser at the hotel. That's why he
Hmm.
stood him up and was like he was going to be, like that was that overarching idea. Tony says that when the three of them walked in and saw the other three in a huddle, they looked like they'd just seen a ghost, as though they were not expecting Bruiser to have left
Oh,
that
like they thought he was
hotel.
already murdered.
They thought he was already dead.
Boo.
It was also insinuated that after Tony had left the hospital, two security people, quote unquote, showed up and told the hospital staff to stop working on Bruiser. So either way,
Yes.
these guys wanted him dead. And there
Yeah.
was like a whole storyline with Carlos Colon later on where he beats up Jose in the ring because for killing Bruiser. Like they turned it into
Right, but he actually
a
killed a person.
storyline, but he
There's an
actually
actual
killed a
dead person who
person.
was a father who was like a thing. Ugh, that's
And
terrible.
that was another part of this. Is a thing called K-fob in wrestling, which
Hmm.
is the the storyline. The fact that wrestlers have to hold on to the storyline pretty closely
Hmm.
to like not let the
Hmm.
public in on it. And so there
Sure.
was also some speculation like this, yeah, he's dead, but maybe this is all part of a storyline. And the fact that Carlos Colon ended up doing like a whole bit on this on in a
Right.
later on show, kind of
But a
further.
real man is dead.
And the real man's dead, yeah. And
Jesus.
his wife flew to Puerto Rico when she learned that he'd been stabbed, and it
His
was too
poor
late. He was already
kid.
dead. Yeah.
Fuck. Poor everyone. That's terrible.
So one thing I would say is that after like watching a lot of interviews on this,
Hmm.
Dutch Mantel in particular did a really great interview because he like was very vocal that like Jose should be dead for what he did. There's a lot of people in the wrestling community that really, really didn't like Bruiser because he was the top guy, and usually you
Hmm.
want the top guy is who everybody's shooting for anyways. And he was kind of a bully. Like if he thought that you were trying to fuck him over or stand between him and his
Hmm.
money or his family's money, he would let you know. And that's why like the threat of him beating somebody up over $40,000, like he's gonna do it. Like this isn't like an empty veiled threat. Like that's his
Right.
reputation. And
Because he's like his own
so
business. Yeah.
yeah, he's his own business. And so that's another piece of this. But realistically, he was also part owner in this organization at this point. So he could have taken them to court or something.
Yeah.
Like he could have done something different, but like it never amounted to that anyways because they killed him.
Just want to say, don't kill people again.
Yeah. Don't kill people. Generally not a good thing to do. But yeah, it's at that time he would have been basically he was essentially The Rock or Hulk Hogan of his era of wrestling.
Wow.
And there was really nobody close. So
That's crazy.
that's the story. And what's funny is his story is actually very similar to The Rock because he was also like a gigantic football player, and he
Hmm.
went out for so he played he played college football, and then he
Hmm.
went out for the NFL. He got cut from the NFL, and he was like, "Well, what can I do?" He's like, "Well, my body's literally only made for football or professional wrestling." And he just went to professional wrestling, exactly like The
Right.
Rock.
Like The Rock played in Canada, right? 'Cause he like,
So I don't know professionally if he played in Canada. I don't think he played professionally in Canada. I know The Rock because I went to University of Miami, and he was on the University of Miami championship team in 2001 when we beat Ohio State. I was a part of it. I was like a sophomore in high
hmm.
school.
Hmm. Um, wow. It's crazy. I'm
But
sure there's
yeah,
a lot more stories in WWE, like that one with the guy who killed his family and all that, of like crazy, like
yeah.
real life violence.
There's a show called. This is where I heard the Bruiser Brody story
Um,
on
I
Vice.
have, I have another professional wrestling story to tell you.
Tell me.
Um, Goldberg, the
Yeah.
wrestler. I knew some kids who were abused, and Goldberg does a charity thing where he meets with them and just becomes like a male role model who won't hurt them. It was very lovely.
Aw.
He's just like,
There,
you can trust people. He's a good guy.
dude, like I've come to like find that generally speaking, wrestlers are kind of like awesome humans. Like
Yeah.
John Cena seems like he's done the most Make-A-Wish gifts out of anybody or
Mm-hmm.
something. The
Mm-hmm.
Rock is constantly donating to charities. Like they all seem like they're. I mean, I don't know. Some of them are more selfish than others, but like generally speaking, they seem like really great people.
Yeah. I have a friend who got pretty close, and he was like in their like training camp in Florida for a while, but it was a lot of it was like, keep up your reputation. You have to like be this guy no matter where you are,
Yeah,
like a whole thing.
maybe that's what it is. Maybe when you come out of that world, you're like, oh, thank God, finally my nice side can come out. Although I don't know, man.
Exactly.
Stone Cold seems like he is a hard ass all the time. Like I've seen interviews with him like since he retired, and I
Hmm.
mean he's just a good old boy, right? He's like a giant good old boy, and so he just acts like that. He just drives F-350s and shoots guns. Like that's what he likes.
Oh my God, they're huge. Huge.
It's
Love
called
it.
The Dark Side of the Ring. They have several stories. One of them is the Bruiser Brody story, and it is absolutely fantastic. I probably watched that like a year and a half ago and thought it was incredible then, and it still is. They have several of those. Dark Side of the Ring. It's a
Cool.
series, so it's
I
worth
also
watching.
watched the first episode of the one about American Gladiators, and it was also very fun. I don't know if you watched that yet. It's on Netflix.
I haven't
Uh,
seen it.
but did you watch American Gladiators when you were
Oh
little?
yeah. Oh yeah.
So it's a story of how like they all got a shit deal. They got like paid like $1, to do it and like all this stuff, and it's just really fun because it brings back a lot of memories of how freaking fun that was.
That's how it all always goes with when you first get your first taste of like some sort of fame or whatever that you.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember who was it, TLC. She was like, yeah, like I made maybe $300,000 for
Hmm.
our hit album that went like triple platinum or something.
Hmm. We are now accepting advertisers if anyone would like to advertise on Doomed to Fail to our solid 100 people who listen every week.
Taylor, you gotta stop.
100,000 people listen every week.
You gotta
Tell
stop.
your friends. Tell your friends. Well, cool. Thank you, Farz. That was awesome.
Yeah, pay us advertising money so we can learn how to be better marketers.
I'm not going to spend my money on going to marketing school, even though I should.
Our numbers are going up though.
I'm gonna work on it. I tried to make this a TikTok, but I couldn't remember the password to our email, so I'm gonna work on that. Our listener mail is that Nadine sent us some other ideas that I'll send you. And just again, thank you everybody who has written in and given us ideas. I appreciate it. It's so cool that you're listening.
We very
Friends and
much
not
appreciate it.
friends. Love it. Love it.
Yes.
Um, Cool. We are on all the socials at Doom to Fail Pod, and I'm gonna get us to TikTok sometime this week when I figure out a password to our Gmail. I'm reading your emails; they're forwarding to my regular email. That's what's happening. But I will figure that out and do something there, because I am excited about these stories. So thank you, Farz. Super cool.
Wait, can you forward it to my email too?
I think so.
Don't wait.
I no, I'll do it tomorrow because have to we have to like kind of be together because I'll Slack you and you can tell me I think you need a code. Whatever.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll figure it
Let's do
out.
it tomorrow. Uh, thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. We'll go ahead and cut this off. Thanks, everyone. Remember, doomtofailpod@gmail.com. Write us, tell us what you think, tell your friends.
Give us
When
ideas.
we're famous, we will
We'll
send you
say thank you a
spam.
lot. Yes, we'll make an email list once I clean up my email list. I have like this spreadsheet. We have plans. We're gonna be fine.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Taylor.